I am pregnant, so I definitely won't move back to the countryside and live together. I won't live in a two-family home either. No matter what happens, I will not move from this place. Strangely enough, my brother-in-law and his wife ended up squatting in the house I own. They were supposed to live with my in-laws, but to avoid household chores, they refused to live in a two-family home and barged into my house instead. I cannot believe such an unreasonable request is acceptable. Do they think lightly of me? My name is Sarah. I am 28 years old and a working housewife. It has been 3 years since I married Aaron, and we are about to have a child. Since we live in a large house, it would be ideal to have several children. This house was given to me by my parents, who built it for their retirement, but they died without living in it for long. One day, a call came to my husband's cell phone from his parents who live far away. What? A fire at the house? Okay, I will head there right away. After ending the call, my husband explained the situation with a pale face. It seems a fire broke out in the middle of the night, and fortunately his parents were safe and managed to escape, but the house was no longer livable. Given this situation, could they stay here for a while? My husband awkwardly suggested this while gauging my reaction. How could I say no here? I only meet my in-laws twice a year, but we were not on bad terms. Since my husband was humble, I had no choice but to accept. Let's do that. Let's go pick them up quickly. Thank you, Sarah. When I agreed, my husband brightened up and quickly prepared to leave by car. It takes 2 hours by car to reach my in-laws' house. Be careful driving at night, I said as I saw off the car. When my husband returned home, it was past noon the next day. It was really tough, he reported tiredly. When he arrived at my in-laws' house, the fire was already extinguished, but many firefighters and police officers were still at the scene, and my husband had to handle the paperwork instead of the confused in-laws. He quickly checked the damage and gathered information about the next procedures. The cause of the fire was due to a short circuit. Various certificates were needed, and while sorting them out, my husband seemed to be confused. Attending the scene investigation, confirming the damage, calculating the costs for waste disposal. Is he okay? He was groaning like a zombie while talking. Behind my exhausted husband stood his equally drained parents. Their faces were covered in ash, and they were expressionless from fatigue. I'm sorry, Sarah. We really troubled you, said my mother-in-law with a wry smile. But then tears started to overflow, perhaps from the shock. Next to her, my father-in-law quietly said, I'm sorry. According to my husband, the house was almost completely burnt down. Their beloved home, filled with memories, had been lost. It's hard to escape the shock. Don't worry. Family is there to support each other. Just like my husband, I took time off work to prepare for their arrival. This is how our joint living situation started. However, my in-laws did not intend to stay here long and hoped to rebuild their house at the original location once the insurance payout was settled. My father-in-law, who was nearing retirement, was planning to work at a local branch for a while. My mother-in-law has been a housewife for many years and was skilled in household chores, which was a great help as she kept the house tidy. A clean house is comfortable. I was happy to come home to a warm meal. I hoped this joint living would go well. However, an unexpected event occurred. My husband had a brother named Kevin, and one day, his brother and his wife suddenly appeared and said, "We will live here." I owned this house and had not given any approval. Nevertheless, their belongings were continuously brought in. Why would you live here?" Even though I asked, my brother-in-law ignored me and continued giving instructions to the movers. My husband concluded that it was useless to talk to his brother and was checking the situation with his parents. It seems my brother-in-law and his wife were originally supposed to live with my in-laws. If you haven't lived together yet, please stay where you have up until now. Until the house is built, my husband urged, but my brother-in-law excused himself, saying, "We were kicked out of the apartment." What happened? The company went bankrupt, and I lost my job. While that was happening, I couldn't pay the rent, and we were kicked out, my brother-in-law explained. "Did you actually look for a job?" my husband asked sternly, but my brother-in-law just gave a wry smile. "Of course." "But the economy is bad," he answered. Meanwhile, all the belongings had been brought into the house. Considering they had been living in an apartment, the amount of belongings was surprisingly large. "I'm tired. Moving is really tough," while pregnant said the last person to arrive as they entered the house. "Hello, Mandy. It's really been a long time." "Hello. It seems it's going to be tough from now on." As I frowned, my brother-in-law's wife, Mandy, who was pregnant for the first time, cheerfully smiled at me. I can't believe my brother-in-law was unemployed while having a pregnant wife. Their appearance, kicked out of the apartment, did not seem desperate or tense at all. It seemed they had decided to rely on us. My insight was soon proven correct. My brother-in-law and his wife, who suddenly appeared and dominated our house, did absolutely nothing. "Aren't you looking for a new job?" "Even if I find a job here, we'll have to move back once the house is rebuilt. Searching for a job here is pointless. How long will the rebuilding take?" I wish he would at least find some job. But my husband, being the younger brother, found it hard to speak up to his elder brother. I was able to tolerate the pregnant sister-in-law doing nothing, but it was annoying to be constantly ordered around. I've heard that if the pregnancy is going well, one should be able to do a bit of work, but I'm not sure since I have no experience. Sighing, my mother-in-law and I handled all the work. However, what I couldn't stand was when my things were used without permission. "Mandy, do you know where I put my beauty serum?" "Oh, I used up mine, so I borrowed it. I like it because it makes my skin so supple. That beauty serum was my favorite and expensive. I'm going to be late for work. Ha, where's my cell phone?" "Mandy, why are you using it without asking? Give it back." "I'm just talking to a friend. Let me use it." "But I'm in a hurry now." "You're noisy." "Oh, I want to use the internet today, so just let me use the cell phone." "Give it back." Such things also happened. As a result, my mother-in-law bought a new cell phone for my sister-in-law, and I finally got my phone back. My brother-in-law lazed around without working, and his wife continued to use my things without permission. They were truly a nuisance. If it weren't for my usually reserved in-laws, I would definitely be angry. However, my mother-in-law seemed quite exhausted. During the times my husband, father-in-law, and I were at work, she was left alone to take care of my brother-in-law and his wife. She was experiencing both physical fatigue and mental stress. The stress continued, but finally, the insurance money came through, and the reconstruction of the house began to materialize. There was a prospect of them moving out, and I felt a bit relieved. Then, one day, something happened. Take a look at this. "It's the floor plan of the new house," said my father-in-law during a weekend, showing us the blueprints from a meeting with the contractor. It's a full 2-family house with 2 separate entrances, designed to ensure privacy. This way, even if my sister-in-law is lazy, my mother-in-law won't have to do all the housework alone." "That's wonderful," I said. "Isn't it?" replied my mother-in-law with a smile. But then, a problem occurred. "Why are there two kitchens?" asked my sister-in-law. "Does this mean separate utility bills too?" said my brother-in-law. "That's normal," responded my father-in-law. My sister-in-law immediately exclaimed, "I hate this." "What do you hate?" the puzzled father-in-law asked. "Because this way there's no point in living together. There's no need for a two-family house. One kitchen is enough. After all, mother-in-law will do the cooking," my sister-in-law argued. "Huh. But in the future, won't you be the one cooking if you have children?" I said. "No, no, what are you talking about?" she reacted as if I was wrong. "I'll be busy with childcare. My mother-in-law should do all the cleaning, laundry, and cooking," she insisted. To this, my surprised mother-in-law looked utterly shocked. "Mandy, I can support within my capacity, but I can't take on everything. You're a full-time housewife, right? Help out a bit." It seems that my sister-in-law, who was trying to push all household responsibilities onto my mother-in-law, was opposed to the idea of a two-family house. Then she declared, "Enough. I'd rather stay in this house than move to such a place." "Huh? That would be troublesome." "What's so troublesome about it? Moving is impossible now, especially to such a countryside," she replied. My brother-in-law joined in. "Exactly. It's impossible to work in such a countryside," expressing his anger. Their words were so out of place, I didn't know where to begin. "Why don't you find a job quickly and move out?" my husband suggested. "And who will do the housework if I do that?" he retorted. My husband, in-laws, and I were just fed up with their comments when my sister-in-law dropped a decisive statement. "Since I am pregnant, I absolutely will not move back to the countryside to live together. I won't live in a two-family house either. No matter what happens, I will not move from this place," she declared. Her words were truly unacceptable. Family discussions continued over several days, but it seemed that my sister-in-law had no intention of leaving this house. Moreover, the space they occupied gradually expanded. One day, when I returned from work, I found my mother-in-law distressed at the entrance. "What happened?" "Sarah, you're back. Kevin and Mandy started changing rooms on their own. I tried to stop them, but they were too forceful. When I checked inside the house, our spacious bedroom had been taken over by my brother-in-law and his wife. Where are our things?" When I asked my brother-in-law, he pointed to another room, saying, "Ah, I moved everything except the bed to that room. That room was the smallest in the house, and items from our previous bedroom were scattered about. What a mess!" I wanted to consult with my husband immediately, but he was away on a business trip and wouldn't be home for another week. I avoided calling and sent a message, but he hadn't seen it yet, and I felt anxious. The next day, the situation worsened, and debt collectors visited. "Sarah, it's terrible," my mother-in-law called me at work, and I hurried home. When I got home, I found her crouching at the entrance. Apparently, some menacing-looking people had come looking for Kevin. However, Kevin, who usually did nothing all day, was the first to immediately run away. My sister-in-law was also absent. My mother-in-law had to deal with them alone and was quite shaken. Seeing my tearful mother-in-law, I made up my mind. I couldn't endure it any longer. I would tell everything to my husband. I couldn't just stay silent, even though he was on a business trip. It was impossible for my mother-in-law to endure any more, and I was at my limit as well. Our relationship as a couple might be strained, but I didn't care. This house was built by my beloved parents. I could not tolerate any further insults. I decided to call my husband. "Hello, Sarah. What happened?" my husband asked. "Who do you choose, me or your brother?" I asked. What my husband exclaimed. As I explained the situation regarding my brother-in-law and his wife, I could hear his astonishment over the phone. With a deep sigh, my husband said, "All right, Sarah, do as you like." "What did you say?" "Sorry, Sarah. I've trampled over your feelings. It's my responsibility. You can handle my brother and his wife as you please," my husband replied. "Really?" "Of course, because you are the most important." Hearing this from my husband, I felt a renewed attraction to him. Understood. I'll do as I please. With my husband's consent that night, I immediately took action. As usual, my brother-in-law and his wife were relaxing in our room, coming to the kitchen while saying, "I'm hungry. Tonight's meal is special." "What is this?" the surprised sister-in-law asked. "These are boiled green vegetables. Spinach, broccoli, perfect for pregnant women. Please enjoy." "Huh, but is this all?" my sister-in-law asked. "Just eat," I insisted, forcing her to eat. "What else?" my brother-in-law asked. "Here, this is a pile of beans," I presented in front of him. "What is this?" my brother-in-law exclaimed. "Beans are cheap, but rich in nutrients." "Impressive, right?" I explained. "But this isn't enough," he complained. "Just eat," I insisted, and forced him to eat, just like his wife. After dinner, what the hell? This kind of treatment of a pregnant woman is unacceptable, screams were heard. But I silently headed to the room that my brother-in-law and his wife were using as theirs. "What are you doing?" Ignoring my sister-in-law, who hurriedly followed me, I made a phone call. "Can you start right away?" Soon after, a worker in work clothes appeared and immediately dismantled and took away the bed. "What are you doing?" That bed was high quality. It was so comfortable. "It's dangerous for a pregnant woman to fall off the bed." "I'm reluctantly giving it up for your wife's sake. Please sleep on this floor mattress instead." "Huh, what are you talking about?" Since the mattresses they had been using were also unnecessary, I disposed of them as well. "It's late tonight, so I'll lend you this blanket. But as adults, you should prepare your own bedding." Leaving those words behind, I handed them a square object and left the room. "This is a lap blanket." I ignored my sister-in-law's screaming voice. My brother-in-law and his wife complained to us and our parents, but we locked ourselves in our room, so I don't know what happened after that. Eventually, they spent the night on the sofa in the living room. In the morning, when I went to the living room, I felt sharp stares but prepared breakfast without caring and served it to my brother-in-law and his wife. "What is this?" "Boiled potatoes." "Where is the bread?" "Seems like stupid people can't see the bread." "What are you saying? It's clearly right there." When my sister-in-law suddenly reached out her hand, I immediately slapped it away. "Do you really think such behavior is allowed for a pregnant woman? This is abuse. How can you call it abuse when food is being served?" At that response, my sister-in-law was at a loss for words and just looked bewildered. But I couldn't trouble a pregnant woman any further. I'll leave it to my mother-in-law. Looking at my brother-in-law, he said nothing and walked away. He was probably angry and went gambling, but no need to worry. I had already taken the money from his wallet. I haven't stolen it, just took it back. "Ha, it's missing." Suspicious. After observing for a few days, it became clear that my brother-in-law had stolen it. Pretending to take a bath while keeping watch, I quickly caught the evidence. "Where is my money? Give it back." As expected, my brother-in-law hurried home and burst into the room, screaming, "Oh, you're back. Then, please handle the guest. I left the handling of the visitor to my brother-in-law." Ha! At that single word, my brother-in-law was at a loss for words. "Sorry for the trouble. Please leave the rest to me." Facing my brother-in-law were people with menacing looks. "We need to talk about the money you owe. Come to the office." Ah, just like in a movie. In front of such a peculiar sensation, my brother-in-law, with tears in his eyes, was led away. By the way, everything was prepared in advance. Of course, both my in-laws and sister-in-law agreed as long as it wouldn't cause them any trouble. Now, on to the final stage. "Mandy, you are a stranger, and I have no obligation to keep you here anymore." "What did you say?" My sister-in-law was shocked by my statement. I quickly presented her with documents. "It seems you've been using my phone without permission, sending calls and emails. The records are here. That child, he's not my brother-in-law's, is he?" "Ha! What?" my in-laws exclaimed. It turns out my sister-in-law had been dating another man before she married, and he seemed to be the father of the child. The remaining emails included, "Once the baby is born, let's go out together as a family of 3. Leaving such evidence was truly foolish. "Once brother-in-law returns, you will probably get a divorce. But before that, please leave this place." At those words, my sister-in-law's complexion faded. "What are you saying? You're going to kick out a pregnant woman? You all are terrible." "No, the problem lies with you. I've already contacted your parents." "Huh? You're sending me back home?" "I don't want to go back home. It's too rural there. Maybe living here is still better. Please, Father, let us live in your house. I have no problem with a 2-family home." Well, the plan for the 2-family home has been canceled. My sister-in-law's face got pale at my father-in-law's declaration. "What did you say?" "We're planning to clear this site and sell the land. Then we intend to move to an apartment." "Why is this happening?" My sister-in-law crumbled as if she had lost all her options. At that moment, the intercom rang. "It seems your parents have arrived from your hometown." "Really?" Seeing her real parents in front of her, my sister-in-law's face turned as white as if she were a ghost. She was quickly taken back to her hometown. Returned to her very strict parents, she became completely disheartened. Her parents demanded compensation from my brother-in-law, but he did not return. Although my in-laws seemed a bit sad, they accepted their son's actions as his own responsibility since he was an independent adult. Afterward, they bought a new apartment and moved there. As a result, we were able to regain our peaceful days. Once the stress was gone, I soon became pregnant. My husband cried with joy, and my in-laws were very pleased. We repaired the house and prepared to welcome our new family member. "Mom, Dad, please watch over us," I said as I looked around the house and gently stroked my pregnant belly.
"We are going to live in this house as a family. You should be grateful, you know?" my mother-in-law said, looking down at me with a gentle smile. How rude she is. She said that despite the fact that my mother had passed away from illness not long ago, it was certainly unpleasant to hear my mother-in-law, with whom I had no connection, cheerfully talk about renovating the house. She came suddenly, even though the funeral hadn't taken place yet, without offering a single word of condolence. Instead, there she was, talking happily about living with her son, ignoring me as I was consumed by tears. It seems to her the family only includes her son, and I am like an outsider. She waved her hand at me as if she was shooing away a pest. I'm saying we'll live as a family. Did you think a daughter-in-law with no blood relation would be treated as family? My name is Tracy, and I'm 30 years old. I have an older brother I respect, who is 5 years older than me. We've always been very close, and he has always been there to help me on anything. When I was having trouble with friends in elementary school, he would go directly to them and ask them to be kind to me for my sake. He might be a bit overprotective, but he's a reliable brother who cares deeply for his sister. During my rebellious phase in middle and high school, he often confronted our parents strongly, but he always treated me warmly. He was always there to support me when I was in trouble, a person I could rely on. Don't worry about what others think. I support you, Tracy, he would say, and I used to be envious of his attitude. He also said, when our father passed away from cancer during my university years, I was truly grateful to my teachers and parents. They were the ones who always thought of me and scolded me as he reflected on his past, which was surprising to hear from my once mischievous brother. It was rare to hear him talk about the past, and it made me want to become a respected figure like his teachers and our parents. This experience nurtured in me a desire to support children in their growth and those facing difficulties, leading me to choose a career in teaching. While everyone around me was busy job hunting, I focused solely on preparing for the teacher recruitment exams. I still remember the surprised look on my brother's face when I passed the exam and told him and our mother, "Congratulations. I never thought you would become a teacher, Tracy. Good luck," he said, supporting me. Despite landing my dream job in teaching, reality was not as sweet as I had expected. I was busy every day with lesson preparations and student guidance, with late work becoming the norm. As remote work became more widespread, those in the teaching profession had no such option, forcing me to commute on crowded trains every morning. Weekends and holidays often required attendance for club activities. Additionally, living independently and managing a household as an adult made me acutely aware of the difficulties of domestic tasks. I remember struggling both physically and mentally in my first year as a working adult. Yet, I felt fulfilled in my role as an educator. As I became more accustomed to my teaching life, I started noticing odd behaviors and words from my mother. Conversations over the phone became difficult, and she would quickly forget things we had just talked about. Concerned, I visited my family home and was shocked to see garbage scattered everywhere. My normally tidy mother was confused about why things had gotten to that point, saying she had forgotten to take out the trash or that she had already cleaned up. Sharing the situation with my brother, we decided to go to the hospital together, where the diagnosis was unexpected. Our mother was diagnosed with dementia. Though it was early-stage mild cognitive impairment, her communication with other people had decreased since our father's passing, and her condition had gradually become more apparent. This situation increased my interactions with my brother and naturally led to more frequent visits to our family home. During these visits, my brother and I often discussed the future. Amidst my busy life, a friend introduced me to Steve when I was too overwhelmed with work and household management to find any personal enjoyment. My friend, insisting I needed time to relax, invited me out for drinks, where I met Steve. He worked for a foreign company and was deeply interested in the international aspect of my job as a French teacher. He was sincere and always prioritized me. The time spent with Steve was a happy moment in my busy days. Just having a meal together for a short while made all the fatigue disappear. I was drawn to him, and after dating for 2 years, on a day that wasn't special, he reserved a private room in a restaurant in New York City for us. Unexpectedly, he gave me a ring and proposed, saying, "I want to make you happy, Tracy. I want to marry you," but I couldn't answer right away. The reason was the anticipated burden of caring for my mother as her condition worsened. Steve was aware of my mother's situation, but I hesitated to involve him in this issue. Nonetheless, he encouraged me, saying, "If you're worried about your mother's situation, don't be. I want to support her together with you." I remember barely being able to say yes through my tears. When I decided to marry Steve at 27, we discussed it in advance and also consulted with my brother about my mother's future. As a result, we decided to build a duplex house where we could live together with my mother, using our marriage as the opportunity. From then on, I started receiving more frequent contacts from my mother-in-law. Before the marriage, my interaction with her was limited to greetings and face-to-face meetings. Initially, I felt her interest was minimal, but I sensed a reason behind her frequent recent contacts. Eventually, it became clear that the main content of these contacts was about the new house we plan to build. I heard you're building a new house. What's the floor plan like? I'm curious about my son's new home. Can I see it? As soon as we started talking, she made countless suggestions about the house's design, such as, the kitchen would be better if it were larger, the staircase would be more suitable here, not there. Why not make the room next to the living room a guest room? Floor heating is a must since this area gets quite cold in the winter. I was uncomfortable with my mother-in-law, who wasn't going to live with us, meddling, but Steve stepped in to mediate to avoid conflict. Despite this, my mother-in-law persistently contacted me directly. Suspecting some ulterior motive, I discussed it with Steve. Your mother's behavior feels like she plans to live there herself. I'm worried she might be plotting something. Even if you talk to her, she contacts me directly, and I don't know how to respond. Yeah, there must be some reason for that. Don't worry, I'll handle it from now on. You can ignore all contacts from my mom, but won't she feel bad about that? It's fine. She's acting out of line. I'll talk to her. However, given her nature, she might try to contact you again. In that case, it's okay to avoid her call and ignore it. With Steve's support, I avoided further contact with my mother-in-law. The house design was finalized, and construction on the new home began. We planned to move into the new house in 6 months, and packing was going smoothly when the contacts with my mother-in-law had almost ceased. Steve informed his mother of the completion date of the new house, but she didn't seem to react much. Half a year passed, and the new house was completed. The first floor was arranged with a living room, kitchen, and a spacious room for my mother, while the second floor was our couple's space with individual rooms. However, by the time the new house was completed, my mother's health had begun to decline. During the day, when we were at work, my mother spent a lot of time alone, and I often came home to find the house in disarray. The doctor had warned that limiting her activities could lead to a rapid progression of her symptoms, so we had her do small tasks during the day. Yet, actions that had been easy for her became increasingly difficult. While she retained her cooking ability, she often left pans on the stove after use. She would forget to add detergent when using the washing machine or add too much, resulting in excessive foam. Despite having the newspaper right beside her, she would complain, "The newspaper didn't come today until the evening." The challenges posed by my mother's condition were countless, and my brother and I decided to use daycare services during the day. At first, my mother was confused by the unfamiliar environment, but having companions during the day gradually made her smile more. When she came home, she would talk about making paper crafts or participating in events at the children's center. My mother gradually adapted to this new routine, and her condition seemed to temporarily stabilize, but it didn't last long. Just 2 years later, my mother seemed to have caught an off-season cold, but ultimately, she passed away from pneumonia. Just maintaining daily life seemed to deplete her strength, and she couldn't eat properly due to a lack of appetite, leading to a weakened immune system. I couldn't stop crying and couldn't recover from the sudden event. Yet, administrative tasks such as contacting the city hall, notifying relatives, and arranging funeral services piled up and waited for no one. As I began to prepare for the funeral, my mother-in-law arrived with a lot of luggage. Seeing her ready to stay over, I was grateful she came to help with the funeral preparations and welcomed her, saying, "Thank you so much for coming during this busy time. Please come in." However, as soon as she stepped inside, she made an unexpected statement. "I will live in this house." Surprised and at a loss for words, I couldn't make a rebuttal when she said, "If you don't like it, you can leave. Steve and I will live here." She said that without a word of condolence. I was utterly confused by her sudden, self-centered declaration. Ignoring my bewilderment, my mother-in-law continued, I've waited 2 years, and finally, I can live here. How about it? Is the floor plan to my liking? As she began to walk around the house. At that moment, I understood why she had been contacting us so frequently before. Perhaps she had always intended to move into the home we built. She tried to change the floor plan to her liking and believed that I should receive her instructions rather than Steve, which might explain her persistent contacts. She seemed to have rushed over after hearing about my mother's death from Steve. That's when the shocked Steve said, Mom, didn't you know? The owner of this house isn't me. It was Tracy's mother. What? Moreover, when Tracy's mother passed away, the heir would be Tracy's brother. What does that mean? My mother-in-law, glaring at me, said, the homeowner should be the husband. Steve earns more, and your salary couldn't possibly cover the mortgage. You must be relying entirely on Steve's earnings. This house might as well be Steve's. Really, what an incomprehensible daughter-in-law and her family. What do you think, Steve? Steve tried to explain. No, Mom. Listen, it's okay, Steve. Let me explain, I interjected. My mother-in-law turned her sharp gaze from Steve to me and challenged, What are you trying to say? The mortgage is being paid by my brother and me. I cover the payments with my income, and I have never taken money from Steve. Is that true, Steve? Yes, it's true. I continued, when we built this house, we decided it would eventually go to my brother. Now that my mother has passed away, the home will be for my brother, his wife, and her parents to live in, I explained calmly. My mother-in-law was stunned and speechless, but unable to accept the arrangement. She said, I can't accept that. After living with and caring for your parents, it's natural that it would be my turn next. I've been waiting for this day. This is too unreasonable. You know, I have a lawyer acquaintance. I'll talk to him and proceed with renouncing the inheritance. Of course, we had no intention of doing so, but my mother-in-law was clearly agitated. My brother will be arriving soon, so let's discuss this again when he's here. I will express my opinion directly to your brother and ask for his renunciation. I'm the type to speak my mind, so my position won't change even when your brother arrives. After this statement, my mother-in-law waited in the living room until my brother arrived. Steve, while confused, repeatedly apologized to me. Don't worry. It seems she won't be convinced by just my word, so let's talk again with my mother when my brother arrives. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law was on the phone with a lawyer she knew, moving forward with the discussion on renouncing the inheritance. Regarding the renunciation of inheritance, yes, I believe the person in question will agree. Yes, please prepare the necessary documents if there's progress. My mother-in-law spoke politely on the phone. About an hour later, the sound of a car parking outside was heard. My brother had arrived. Mother, my brother has arrived. As I called out to her, she stood up eagerly, saying, I will have this house transferred to Steve. Then I can live here, and proceeded to the living room. At that moment, the living room door opened, and my brother appeared. My mother-in-law, about to shout something, took a deep breath and opened her mouth wide. But as she opened her mouth, no sound came out, and she looked surprised, losing her strength and sitting down heavily. In fact, my brother's appearance could be mistaken for someone from the underworld by some due to his quite intimidating look. His hobby is surfing. Furthermore, as he works outdoors throughout the year, his skin is sunburned, and the sun damage has made his hair brittle. As a result, finding hair maintenance troublesome, he chose to have a shaved head. Also, he is tall and has a muscular and sturdy physique. Especially noticeable is an old scar on his forehead. This scar was the result of a fall during his elementary school years. But combined with his appearance, many people mistake it for a scar from a blade. Seeing such a brother in person, my mother-in-law seemed to lose her will and slumped down to sit. Do you have anything you would like to say about this house? My brother coldly asked my mother-in-law. No, I had thought I would live here after your mother passed away. But then I heard that you would be living here, and I realized I understood nothing. Did Tracy tell you to live here? We had a thorough discussion about this house before it was built, so I believe there was no such conversation. He spoke in a firm tone. No, I misunderstood. Because I was involved in planning the layout with Tracy before the house was built, I assumed I had a right to live here too. My mother-in-law said, clearly confused and looking down. A right to live here? Does that mean you were offering some sort of support to my sister? No, nothing like that. So, without bearing any burden or making any promises, you just assumed you had a right to live here just by offering your opinion on the layout? Yes, I'm sorry. It was my misunderstanding. At first, my brother looked at me suspiciously, but he refuted my mother-in-law's unreasonable claim with disgust. However, to my mother-in-law, it seemed more like anger than disgust, and she apologized deeply, becoming surprisingly docile. Just because our mother passed away doesn't mean there was ever a discussion about living with my sisters-in-laws. Right, Tracy? Of course. I never discussed the details of this house with my mother-in-law. I only mentioned it was a house for living together with my mother. As I answered my brother's question, my mother-in-law suddenly covered her face with both hands. I had believed that my son, Steve, was the owner of this house. After caring for your mother, I thought it was my turn to live with you. But taking care of an unfamiliar elderly person is difficult. So I thought I would wait until your mother-in-law passed away. When I received the news of her death from my son, I thought it was my turn and terminated my apartment lease. Now, I have nowhere to go. I didn't expect such a rash action without any promise. Either way, after my sister and her husband move out, this house is intended for us to live in. I'm sorry, but we have no intention of living with a stranger who's been disrespectful to us. Please leave. My mother-in-law might be pretending to be humble, but her words revealed contempt for our mother. My brother, too, avoided yelling directly at my mother-in-law, a figure related to me, but his anger was gradually rising, and his voice became lower and colder. When my mother-in-law looked at us for help, we reiterated that she should leave. Actually, due to Steve's job, we will be moving abroad soon. Yeah, Mom, you know I work for a multinational company, and there's always been a possibility of overseas assignment, right? We've talked about this possibility before. We had decided to continue caring for my mother until we moved abroad, a decision discussed with my brother, and Steve supported it. Unfortunately, with my mother's passing, we will follow the original plan, and my brother and his wife will live here. Such a thing. Seeing the disappointment on my mother-in-law's face, Steve and I exchanged looks. Then, sighing, we continued. If you've terminated your apartment and have nowhere to go, how about coming abroad with us? We made the offer to move abroad, expecting her to refuse. You know, I hate flying, right? I don't even have a passport. But if you have nowhere to live, you'll have to find somewhere new. Steve said, looking slightly worried. Still, applying for a passport now would take time, and preparing for an international move can't be done quickly. We're leaving soon, so it's probably impossible. My mother-in-law's previous energy had faded, and she appeared dejected. Seeing this, Steve made a suggestion. Should I talk to John? Wait, I can't go to John's place. Don't contact him. My mother-in-law quickly said, John is Steve's brother. My mother-in-law was eager to live in our house, but adamantly refused to live with Steve's brother, John. But if you have nowhere else to live, what choice do you have? What do you think? As Steve spoke, my mother-in-law, unable to argue, looked down, then suddenly looked up and said, Then, can you just give me money? I absolutely refuse to live with that daughter-in-law. Steve sighed in exasperation as he began to make a phone call. My mother-in-law shrieked, trying to snatch the phone away, but as soon as the call connected, she backed off. It seemed that John's wife had agreed to take my mother-in-law in. Afterward, we hurried to proceed with the funeral preparations and other necessary arrangements, leaving the rest to that side of the family. When my brother and I returned to the living room after finishing our conversation, my mother-in-law was silently sitting on a chair, apparently displeased with the idea of going to John's house. Now we can finally start preparing for the funeral. We still have a little time, so let's get the preparations going and wait, Steve suggested. Agreeing with his proposal, the three of us started listing what needed to be done. An hour passed, and when the doorbell rang, it was John's wife standing at the door. "Hi there." She had the appearance of a typical gal from a bygone era, dressed in eye-catching clothes, wearing a top with a deeply open neckline that day. She's straightforward with her opinions and, despite her casual appearance, dislikes in fairness, being both direct and friendly. It seemed she would get along well with my brother. However, my mother-in-law harbored a dislike for her. "My condolences for your loss." I rushed over, "So please excuse my attire," she said politely, which surprised me a bit. However, as soon as John's wife was led into the living room and saw my mother-in-law, she changed her demeanor and said, "Oh, come on, Grandma, cut it out already. Don't trouble Steve and Tracy anymore. Let's go home," and she helped my mother-in-law to stand up. Originally, we had discussed living together, so if you had just agreed to that proposal from the start, you might have been spending your days more peacefully by now. The pride of the elderly can be quite formidable. Anyway, excuse us for taking her away. We've caused you enough trouble for today. With that declaration, she took my mother-in-law away promptly, apologizing deeply as they left. Actually, my brother and his wife had been proposing for a while that our mother live with them. Despite her unconventional appearance, she's incredibly caring, and when they got married, she promised, "We'll take good care of her." However, our mother refused to live with her, choosing to live alone consistently. "She's really got a unique personality," Steve said, reflecting on this with a bittersweet smile. "There's goodness at her core, and my brother is also reliable. So it's likely that our mother will find stability in her new home with them." As Steve predicted, my mother-in-law started living with John and his wife without any issues. With John's wife around, it became difficult for her to behave selfishly, and she now seems to be living relatively peaceful days. Perhaps this somewhat strict environment suits her. She's always complaining, but she never actually tries to do anything on her own and doesn't seem to want to live by herself. "She just likes to grumble," Steve said, watching his mother's behavior with a resigned chuckle. "The house we built is now inhabited by John and his wife, according to the plan we had set. It has become a warm space that deepens family bonds, with John's wife's parents recently joining the household, starting a multi-generational living arrangement. As agreed upon from the beginning, the mortgage is now shared between John and his wife's parents. I am currently in Paris, France, where my husband, Steve, was assigned for work. Initially, there was some apprehension about living in an unfamiliar land. Fortunately, my proficiency in French proved to be a blessing, allowing me to quickly adapt and integrate into the local community. Leveraging my experience as a French teacher in the US, I've taken up teaching English in France. The work environment here differs from the US, with reasonable working hours that allow for personal time. With guaranteed weekends off, Steve and I now enjoy much more time together, experiencing new stimuli every day and leading a more relaxed life. Thus, we are spending our days meaningfully in a different environment from the US, learning and enjoying life in a new land.